Hola amigos, bien o no, saludos desde Medellín. Hoy, un cosa muy corto, pero solo quiero compartir um, un libro que yo estoy leyendo, lamentable, solo en inglés porque mi español no es con este nivel, pero quiero compartir con ustedes porque claro es casi la más famoso libro en la lengua espan, español. Um, pero también puede ilustrar por qué en alguna vez una traducción con algún clásico, como este libro, puede también servir para disfrutar y entender un poco más con el nuevo lengua también. Voy a explicar. So, the theme today, I'm going to share with you a little bit from Don Quixote. Now, I must admit, my Spanish is very sadly not at a level I can tackle this book in the original. Definitely not. But I have here what is generally agreed to be one of the better, more recent translations of the book into English. So why read it in English? Well, it's because this book, particularly in Spanish, is so famous. It has such a cultural impact on the Spanish language. It's rather like trying to understand English without reading Shakespeare. But obviously, as that is a parallel, Shakespeare is not the easiest thing to read. So tackling that in some type of translation might not be a bad idea. And for this reason, I'm trying to work my way through this in English because the style of the story is very interesting. But I'm just going to share with you a short piece from the translator's introduction. The lady that translated the book, a lady called Edith Grossman, has written a little bit about it in the introduction, which is quite interesting. And then I'm going to read you a bit from the actual translation, the book she actually translated, just to see what you think, something else to listen to. But let's see what the translator said about the problem she had translating this 17th century Spanish into modern English. I believe that my primary obligation as a literary translator is to recreate for the reader in English the experience of the reader in Spanish. When Cervantes wrote Don Quixote, it was not yet a seminal masterpiece of European literature, the book that crystallized forever the making of literature out of life and literature, that explored in typically ironic fashion and for the first time the blurred and shifting frontiers between fact and fiction, imagination and history, perception and physical reality, or that set the stage for all Hispanic studies and all serious discussions of the history and nature of the novel. When Cervantes wrote Don Quixote, his language was not archaic or quaint. He wrote in a crackling, up-to-date Spanish that was as an intrinsic part of his time. A modern language that both reflected and helped to shape the way people experience the world. And this meant that I, the translator, did not need to find a special anachronistic, somehow 17th century voice, but could translate his astonishingly fine writing into contemporary English. So I share that bit with you because that's an interesting idea, that we can use translations like these in a way to help us perhaps understand a bit more easily what otherwise might be a very, very difficult language from a long time back, but still allow us to enjoy what is really a very important work in the other language, if you like. So that's something to think about. And also it shows you that with these type of books, often some of the notes, like the introductions and the translators' essays and things, are often very interesting to read as well. They help you get some idea about the story before you start it, because clearly something like this is not an afternoon's reading. It takes quite a while. So I'm going to read you now the last part of what's called the prologue. And this is where Cervantes is talking about the problems he's had in writing the book, and particularly the prologue for the book. In deep silence, I listened to what my friend told me, and his words made so great an impression on me that I did not dispute them, but acknowledged their merit and wanted to use them to write this prologue, in which you will see, gentle reader, the cleverness of my friend, my good fortune in finding the adviser I needed in time, and your own relief at finding so sincere and uncomplicated a history as that of the famous Don Quixote of La Mancha, who is thought by all the residents of the district of Montiel to have been the most chaste lover and most valiant knight seen in those environs for many years. I do not want to charge you too much for the service I have performed in introducing you to so noble and honourable a knight, but I do want you to thank me for allowing you to make the acquaintance of the famous Sancho Panza, his squire, in whom, in my opinion, I have summarised for you all the squirely wit and charm scattered throughout the great mass of inane books of chivalry. And having said this, may God grant you health and not forget me. Vale. So there we are. Now clearly, if you're familiar with this in the original Spanish, you have a better opinion than me in terms of how good that translation is, but I think it shows that it's still a very interesting piece, even as it's been translated into, as she says, more modern English, but very enjoyable. So there we go. A different reflection on that. Translations, should you use them? Yeah, I don't see why not. Because sometimes it's worth understanding the book, because the history of the book and the impact of this particular book on all things Spanish language, if we like, is huge. So if I don't understand this book, at least the basics of the plot and what's it about, sometimes it's going to be hard for me to understand other parts of perhaps Spanish language, Spanish literature, as I meet them going forwards. And of course, eventually, I can hope I can manage this in the original. So that's the thinking of that. If you find that some of the literature of English, of which there's a lot, admittedly, is a bit too old-fashioned, or it's just too difficult for you to read in the original, in some ways, perhaps reading it in translation, or at least some of it in translation, might at least help you understand where the book fits amongst all the others within the history and the culture of the language, and that at least might help you work out where you want to start, or what's your best route in to reading to get a better understanding of something that perhaps interests you more. So there we go. That's a very roundabout way of bringing that topic in today, but I hope you enjoy the reading. I'm going to go off and read a bit more of this, see how far I get on. But for now, from Medellin, say cheerio.